Okay, as promised, I wanted to expose you to take the opportunity from time to time within this month to expose you to various genres of poetry. And today we're going to look at what's called persona poetry and wearing the mask. Persona actually is a Latin derivative, which means actually means mask, also known as dramatic monologue. And what it is basically the author, and we're going to look at an example, a snippet. An excerpt from a longer poem by Frank Bedard, the poet. What a persona poem is, or dramatic monologue is you're entering the embodiment. You're putting on the mask of that is the embodiment of someone else and writing through their point of view or their perspective. So let's look at a couple ways to define what persona poem is. Okay, persona poetry and an overview. The literary tradition of persona, of writing poems and voices or for perspectives of other than the poet's own, is ancient in origin and contemporary in practice. The embodiment of different voices is not only a dramatic and creative moment, but also a moment of true empathy, as the author or poet moves beyond his or her own margins to fully inhabit the character, personality, and mindset of another human being. In Frank Bedard, famous poet, older guy, he won the Pulitzer Prize 2 years ago in 2018 for his collective poems. Half Light was the title of the collection, and is well known within the New York sort of poetic community. He writes in a number of ways, but one of the ways he does prolifically write is through the persona poem or the dramatic monologue. And I think one of his most famous ones is called Herbert White. And he created this poem by compiling various different murders that had taken place that he read about when he was younger, and he wanted to sort of to enter the mindset of the murderer of this individual, and he called him Herbert White. So he uh, wrote about this guy that was fictitious. He wasn't real, but it was based on real murderers that he compiled into one person, into one persona. So let's take a look at it. So this is an excerpt from the poem written by the poet Frank Bedard called Herbert White. It's kind of graphic, so just go with it and just understand what Frank Bedard is attempting to do to really enter the mindset of a psychopath, a murderer and a psychopath. All right, here we go. When I hit her on the head, it was good, and then I did it in her a couple of times, but it was funny. Afterwards, it was as if somebody else did it. Everything flat, without sharpness, richness, or line. Still, I'd like to drive past the woods where she lay, tell the old lady and the kids I had to take a piss, hop out and do it to her. When the body got too discomposed, I'd just jack off, letting it fall on her. It sounds crazy, but I tell you, sometimes it was beautiful. I don't know how to say it, but for a minute, everything was possible. And well, like I said, she didn't move. And I saw under me a little girl was just lying there in the mud. And I knew I couldn't have done that. Somebody else had to have done that. Standing above her there, the whole buggy of them waiting for me, made me feel good. But still, just like I knew all along, she didn't move. Okay, there's a number of things going on. This is a much longer poem. And on the next slide, I give you the links that you can click on for Herbert Walker as well as another persona poem by Frank Bedard called Ellen West. So notice there's some craziness going on with the white space and his line spacing that he's changing it up. He's doing some very um, different things here. It's almost schizophrenic in the way he's changing the line spacing so frequently. So we get one line at the beginning, and notice it's a quote. The whole poem is a quote. One quote, as if he's entering that persona of Herbert Walker. Uh, as if this guy is sitting down and confessing of what he did, right? So we get the quote, which is unusual, the whole poem being a quote. Uh, and then the first line, when I hit her on the head, it was good. That's its own stanza, one line. Then he creates a new stanza, right? We get the pause with all that white space. As I said before, remember, try to respect the punctuation and the white space. And I tried to read it with that fidelity, reading to the fidelity of how it's written, right? When I hit her on the head, it was good. Big pause. And then I did it to her a couple of times. You get this dash. It's a double dash or what's called an M dash at the end of. And then I did it to her a couple of times, comma. So this double punctuation. Frank Bedard really wants you to pause on that line, but it was funny. So we're getting to understand this crazy personality, this individual, right? They're doing this dramatic, ugly thing, but it's also funny. And then we get the big double punctuation you get in the comma and the em dash, big pause, right? But it was funny afterwards. Pause again because we get the comma or the end of the line. It was as if somebody else did it with the ellipses, right? Which is also an indication that Frank Bedard wants you to pause. And maybe the individual's trying to find their words, the persona, the Herbert Walker is attempting to find his words, right? Everything flat without sharpness, richness, or line. So that's a beautiful line right there. Um, and then we move down. Let's move to the right side. So we get the double dash at the beginning. So a quietness, a pause. It sounds crazy, but I tell you, sometimes it was beautiful. I don't know how to say it. So Frank Bedard's sort of manipulating the punctuation and the language. I don't know how as an enjambment. Remember we spoke about enjambment and caesuras? He's enjamming that to give different meaning, double meaning. I don't know how. Like, as if they don't. I don't. Herbert Walker is saying I don't know how it was beautiful, but it was. It sounds crazy, but I tell you, sometimes it was beautiful. I don't know how, right? But he's not really saying that. I don't know how to say it, but for a minute, everything was possible, and then, well, like I said, she didn't move. And I saw under me a little girl was just lying there in the mud. So notice the little girl, right? There's great tension and conflict that exists between um, killing a man, standing over a corpse, killing it, raping it multiple times, his family out in the car, uh, outside the tree line waiting for him, uh, and you got this little girl. So he's building on the idea of this being a psychopath, right? And the tension that exists, and a child in mud, this corpse. I would implore you to go read this in its entirety. Attempt to reproduce in your head the sound that Frank Bedard is attempting to recreate by manipulating the punctuation to create pause, to slow down, and using the line breaks, the white space, to do the same thing. Okay, here you go. Um, the two links. First one is to the entire poem of Herbert White. Please go read it. I think I was saying Herbert Walker in the last slide. Herbert White. Um, And then the second one, other persona poem by Frank Bedard, Ellen West, which is really good. This is based on a real person as opposed to a compilation of individuals like Herbert White was. This is based on a real woman who was anorexic, and how she sort of speaks about why she's anorexic and how her body is changing, and she's tracking the changes. And it's done really well. And the best persona poems are if the individual, in this case Frank Bedard, can really put that mask on that we spoke about before, can really enter the persona or personality of the individual they're attempting to write about. Okay, thanks guys. I appreciate you listening to this. We're probably not going to revisit persona poem the rest of the semester. Just it's a different genre of poetry I wanted to introduce you to that I thought was important. You can use this as a source if you need it. If you wanted to write, use this as a source for any of your papers that you're writing on. If you feel as if you can compare and contrast this to other works that we're going to look at within the class. All right, thank you. Bye.